The spring of 1815 should have been the happiest season of Beatrice Hartley's life. Instead, it became the moment her worst fears crystallized into humiliating reality. She stood before the altar of St. Catherine's Chapel, her ivory gown pristine against the warm wood of the pews, her gloved hands clutching a modest bouquet of English roses. 200 guests filled the seats behind her, a respectable number for a woman of no particular consequence marrying a gentleman of moderate means. The morning light filtered through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the stone floor, and Beatrice forced herself to breathe slowly, to maintain the composure that had become her armor over 26 years of navigating a society that valued women primarily for youth and dowries. She possessed neither in abundance. The Reverend Mr. Whitmore stood opposite her, his expression shifting from patient to concerned to something approaching pity. He cleared his throat softly, leaned closer, and whispered words that would echo in her mind for days afterward. "Miss Hartley, I regret to inform you, Mr. Pembroke will not be attending the ceremony." The words took a moment to penetrate, as though spoken in a foreign tongue. Beatrice blinked, her fingers tightening reflexively around the rose stems. "I beg your pardon? He has departed this morning with Miss Alice Morton, your cousin's governess." The Reverend's voice carried genuine sympathy, but sympathy could not erase the brutal truth. He pressed a folded letter into her palm. "He left this for you." Beatrice stared at the paper, unable to open it, unable to move. Behind her, the whispers began. A low, insidious rustle like wind through dead leaves. Did he truly abandon her at the altar? At her age, what did she expect? She should have accepted Lord Fenton 3 years ago when she had the chance. 26 and left standing. How perfectly dreadful. My dear, she's been on the shelf for years. This was her last hope, surely. Each comment was a small, precise cut. Beatrice had endured such remarks for years, but always as abstract judgments delivered in drawing rooms or whispered behind fans at assemblies. Never had she felt the full weight of society's scorn so acutely, so publicly. Every eye fixed upon her rigid spine, waiting to see if she would crumble, if she would weep, if she would provide them with an even more delicious scandal to dissect over tea. She would not. With movements that felt mechanical, disconnected from her body, Beatrice turned to face the congregation. 200 faces stared back, some shocked, some gleeful, some uncomfortably sympathetic. Lady Margaret Hartley, her cousin and the closest thing to family she possessed, half rose from her seat, one hand extended, but Beatrice shook her head almost imperceptibly. She would walk out with dignity, even if it killed her. The aisle stretched endlessly before her, each step a small eternity. Her vision narrowed to the carved wooden doors at the chapel's entrance, her only goal to reach them before the tears burning behind her eyes could escape. The whispers followed her like a funeral procession, and she heard fragments that lodged in her chest like splinters. Always thought herself too clever. Refused perfectly acceptable offers. This is what pride brings. The moment she crossed the threshold into the entrance hall, Beatrice gathered her skirts and ran. Rain had begun falling during the ceremony that never was. Heavy sheets of water that turned the gardens into a blur of green and gray. Beatrice plunged into it without thought, without destination, aware only of the desperate need to escape those pitying, judging eyes. Her elaborate coiffure collapsed within moments, pins scattering across wet grass. Her gown, which had taken 3 fittings to perfect, became a sodden weight dragging at her legs. She did not care. The garden maze provided temporary shelter beneath a vine-covered pergola at its heart, and there, finally alone, Beatrice allowed herself to break. She sank onto a stone bench, her body folding forward as sobs tore from her throat. ugly, gasping sounds that bore no resemblance to the delicate tears society permitted ladies. These were the sounds of something fundamental shattering, of every careful hope she had nursed dissolving into nothing. She had not loved Mr. Pembroke. That was the bitter irony. She had accepted his proposal because he seemed kind, because at 26 she understood that choices narrowed with each passing year, because she was tired of being pitied and whispered about and passed over. She had convinced herself that companionship and respect could be enough, that romantic love was a luxury for younger, prettier, wealthier girls. But even that modest hope had been too much to ask. The humiliation was complete. She was not merely rejected, she was publicly, spectacularly discarded. Abandoned at the altar for a governess, a woman with even less status than herself. The message could not have been clearer. Beatrice Hartley was not simply undesirable. She was so profoundly inadequate that a man would risk scandal rather than bind himself to her. "The rain does not judge," a deep voice said from the shadows. "Nor do I." Beatrice's head snapped up, her heart lurching. Through the curtain of rain beyond the pergola, a figure materialized. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed entirely in black save for the stark white of his cravat. He moved with the unconscious authority of a man accustomed to command, and even through her tears, Beatrice recognized him. Alexander Sinclair, Duke of Ravenswood. She had seen him only once before, at a ball in London 2 seasons past. He had been pointed out to her with whispered warnings. The coldest man in England, they said. A duke who had been jilted himself years ago and had since developed a reputation for brilliant cruelty in business and a complete lack of interest in matrimony. Women pursued him relentlessly for his title and fortune. He rebuffed them all with surgical precision. He was society's most eligible bachelor, and its most confirmed bachelor simultaneously, a contradiction that fascinated and frustrated the marriage market in equal measure. And he was watching her with eyes that were not cold at all, but rather filled with something she could not quite name. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "Your Grace," Beatrice managed, attempting to rise, but her legs would not cooperate. She remained seated, humiliated anew by her weakness, by her tear-stained face and ruined gown and complete lack of decorum. Alexander, for she found herself thinking of him by his given name, though they had never been formally introduced, stepped fully under the pergola's shelter. Rain dripped from his dark hair, and she realized he must have been standing in the storm himself before she arrived. What brought a duke to stand alone in a tempest? Without speaking, he shrugged out of his greatcoat and draped it around her shoulders. The garment was heavy with rain but still held his warmth, and it smelled of sandalwood and something indefinably masculine. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that fresh tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks. "I apologize," she whispered. "You should not have to witness—" "I witnessed my own bride flee our wedding 8 years ago," he interrupted quietly, settling onto the bench beside her. "Propriety be damned, apparently. She ran off with my closest friend the morning of our ceremony. I stood at that altar much as you did today, while 300 guests whispered and stared." Beatrice turned to look at him fully for the first time. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic planes, handsome in a severe way that might have been intimidating if not for the unexpected softness in his gray eyes. Those eyes held old pain, carefully controlled, but unmistakable. "Then you understand," she said simply. "I understand that the world will tell you this defines you," Alexander replied, his gaze fixed on the rain beyond their shelter. "That you are ruined, that you will never recover, that this moment of someone else's cruelty becomes your permanent identity." He turned to her, and the intensity in his expression stole her breath. "I understand that they are wrong." Beatrice found she could not look away from him. In a day of horror, this strange, unexpected connection felt like the only real thing. Two people who had suffered the same wound, who recognized in each other a particular species of survival. "Why are you here?" she asked. "In this garden? In this storm?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, though it held no humor. "I find that rain suits certain moods, and I have been told I have become rather too fond of solitude and storms." He paused, then added with careful neutrality, "I am a guest at the neighboring estate. I heard of today's events." "Then you came to witness the spectacle?" "I came to escape the gossip. I did not expect to find you here." His voice gentled. "But I am not sorry that I did." They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the rain drum against leaves and stone. Beatrice felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing, for the wound was too fresh for that, but perhaps the first faint possibility that she might survive this, that she might be more than this moment of abandonment. "I should return," she said at last, though the prospect filled her with dread. "My cousin will be worried." Alexander rose and offered his hand. Beatrice hesitated only briefly before placing her gloved fingers in his. His grip was firm, steady, and he drew her to her feet with effortless strength. He did not immediately release her hand. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice low and serious, "what happened today speaks only to Mr. Pembroke's character, not to yours. Do not let him steal more than he already has." The words were simple, but they landed with unexpected force. Beatrice nodded, not trusting her voice, and reluctantly withdrew her hand from his. Together, they walked through the rain toward the manor house, Alexander maintaining a respectful distance but clearly intent on seeing her safely inside. At the servants' entrance, Lady Margaret appeared, her face creased with worry. She gasped at the sight of Beatrice's bedraggled state, then noticed the imposing figure beside her. "Your Grace," Margaret said, dropping into a curtsy despite her alarm. "I did not realize you were acquainted with my cousin." "We are not," Alexander replied smoothly. "But I happened upon Miss Hartley in some distress and could not, in good conscience, leave her unattended." He bowed to Beatrice, his eyes holding hers for a fraction longer than propriety dictated. "I hope you will find some peace, Miss Hartley." Then he was gone, striding back into the storm with the same purposeful grace that had brought him to her side. Beatrice watched him disappear into the rain, his greatcoat still warm around her shoulders, and felt the strangest sensation blooming in her chest. Not hope. She had no right to hope. Not today. But perhaps the faintest glimmer of curiosity about what tomorrow might bring. The morning after the disaster, Beatrice woke to find her cousin's home transformed into a grotesque parody of a mourning house. Visitors arrived in steady streams, ostensibly to offer comfort, but in reality to feast upon the scandal. They filled the drawing room with false sympathy and poorly concealed excitement, their eyes bright with the pleasure of witnessing ruin firsthand. Lady Margaret did her best to manage the onslaught, but even her formidable social skills could not stem the tide. Beatrice was required to sit in the drawing room, to accept condolences delivered with barely suppressed glee, to endure comments that each felt like a small violence. "My dear Miss Hartley, how brave you are to show your face. At least you discovered his true nature before the marriage was consummated. Imagine the scandal then. Perhaps this is Providence suggesting a quieter life, away from society's demands." Each visitor stayed precisely the socially acceptable duration, extracted their pound of flesh in the form of Beatrice's humiliation, then departed to spread the tale further. By noon, Beatrice felt scraped hollow, her composure a mask that grew heavier with each passing hour. She could not endure another moment. Pleading a headache, which was no lie, given the pounding behind her temples, Beatrice escaped through the morning room's French doors. The rain had cleared, leaving the world washed clean and brilliant with early spring color. She walked without direction, seeking only distance from the house and its poisonous atmosphere. Her wandering brought her to the edge of Lady Margaret's property, where manicured gardens gave way to wilder parkland. A stone wall marked the boundary with the neighboring estate, and it was there that she saw him. Alexander Sinclair sat astride a magnificent black stallion, motionless as a statue, watching her with that same penetrating gaze from the day before. He wore riding clothes that emphasized his powerful build, and the morning sun caught in his dark hair. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with fluid grace, he dismounted and approached the wall that separated them. "Miss Hartley?" he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "I had hoped the morning would find you in better spirits than yesterday." "The morning finds me besieged by well-wishers," Beatrice replied, surprised by the tartness in her tone, though well-wishers may be too generous a term for vultures circling a carcass. A genuine smile flickered across Alexander's features, brief but transformative. "I have some familiarity with vultures. They are remarkably persistent creatures." "Did you find them so after your own—" Beatrice hesitated, unsure if mentioning his past would offend. "After my own public humiliation?" Alexander finished for her. "Yes. They descended en masse, offering sympathy while gorging themselves on my pain. I learned quickly to avoid them." He paused, studying her face. "You escaped their clutches this morning?" "Temporarily. I fear I will be expected to return soon." "Or," Alexander said slowly, "you might walk for a while longer. These lands connect to public paths that lead quite far from your cousin's estate. One might walk for an hour or more before returning, and who could fault you for seeking healthful exercise?" It was an invitation, delicately offered and easily refused if she wished. Beatrice considered the prospect of returning immediately to that drawing room full of false sympathy and genuine malice. Then she considered the alternative, walking in morning sunlight with a man who understood her particular species of pain. "I find I am suddenly desirous of a longer walk," she said. Alexander's smile returned, warmer this time. He led his horse to a gate in the stone wall, opened it, and gestured for Beatrice to join him on his side of the boundary. They walked in companionable silence for several minutes, Alexander leading his stallion by the reins, before he spoke again. "May I ask an impertinent question, Miss Hartley? Given that we have already dispensed with proper introductions and you have witnessed me at my absolute worst, I believe you have earned some latitude. Did you love him, the man who abandoned you?" Beatrice considered lying, offering the expected response about wounded affection and betrayed trust. But something about Alexander's directness, his willingness to speak of uncomfortable truths, invited honesty. "No," she admitted. "I did not love Mr. Pembroke. I accepted his proposal because he seemed kind, and I am 26 years old with no fortune and no beauty to recommend me. I thought companionship and respect might be enough." She laughed, a harsh sound. "I was wrong on both counts. He was neither kind nor respectful." "You are wrong about something else as well," Alexander said quietly. "What?" "You are beautiful." Beatrice stopped walking, heat flooding her cheeks. "Your Grace, you need not—" "I do not offer false flattery," he interrupted, turning to face her fully. "You have an arresting face, Miss Hartley. Intelligence shines from your eyes, and there is a strength in the set of your jaw that suggests you have weathered storms before this one. Perhaps you do not possess the vapid prettiness society currently prizes, but that is to your credit, not your detriment." No one had ever spoken to her thus. Beatrice found herself unable to formulate a response, her throat tight with an emotion she could not name. Alexander seemed to recognize her discomfort, for he resumed walking, allowing the moment to pass. You said you thought companionship might be enough. Do you still believe that? I no longer know what to believe, Beatrice confessed. I spent years watching other women marry for love and telling myself I was too practical, too sensible for such romantic notions. I convinced myself that love was for heroines in novels, not for ordinary women like me. And then Mr. Pembroke seemed to offer at least a semblance of partnership, of mutual regard. She shook her head. But it was all illusion. Even my modest hopes were too grand. Or perhaps you simply aimed them at the wrong target. They walked for nearly an hour, their conversation ranging from the personal to the philosophical. Alexander spoke of his own disillusionment after being abandoned, of the years he had spent building walls around himself, of the reputation for coldness he had deliberately cultivated as armor against further injury. I decided that if I could not have love, I would have power and respect instead, he told her. I became the Duke of Ravenswood in truth, formidable, unapproachable, immune to the machinations of ambitious mamas and their marriage-minded daughters. I told myself I was content. Were you? Beatrice asked. Content? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I was safe, he said at last. But safety and contentment are not the same thing, are they? No, Beatrice agreed softly. They are not. When they finally parted, Alexander insisting on escorting her back to the boundary of Lady Margaret's property, Beatrice felt something she had not experienced in months, perhaps years. Not happiness precisely, but a sense of being truly seen, truly heard, by another human being. Will you walk again tomorrow morning? Alexander asked as they reached the gate. I believe I shall require another escape from well-wishers, Beatrice replied, surprised by the lightness in her own voice. Then I shall happen to be riding in this vicinity at the same hour. It became a pattern over the following days. Each morning, Beatrice would slip away from the house and find Alexander waiting at the boundary between their properties. They would walk and talk for an hour, sometimes longer, their conversations deepening with each encounter. He told her about his estates, his responsibilities, his passion for land management and agricultural innovation. She spoke of her love of literature, her sharp observations about society's hypocrisies, her secret dreams of traveling beyond England's shores. They debated philosophy, laughed over shared dislikes of certain pompous members of the ton, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, something shifted between them. Beatrice began to notice details. The way Alexander's eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the elegant strength of his hands, the way he listened to her with complete attention as though her words truly mattered. She caught herself anticipating their morning walks with an eagerness that had nothing to do with escaping her cousin's drawing room and everything to do with seeing him again. And she suspected, though hardly dared believe, that he felt something similar. On the 5th morning of their acquaintance, everything changed. Beatrice had endured another afternoon of visitors the previous day, this time including several ladies who had been particularly vicious in their commentary. She had maintained her composure throughout, but when she finally retreated to her room, she had wept with frustration and rage at her powerlessness against their cruelty. She was still in a fragile state when she arrived at their meeting place to find Alexander looking unusually tense. Before she could inquire as to the cause, voices drifted across the parkland. A group of ladies taking their own morning constitutional, apparently. Cannot believe the Duke wastes his time with that Hartley creature, one voice said clearly. She must be throwing herself at him in desperation. The Duke of Ravenswood has no interest in marriage, least of all to a jilted spinster with nothing to recommend her, another woman agreed. He likely finds her amusing in a pathetic sort of way. Poor dear probably thinks he might rescue her from her disgrace, A third voice chimed in with false sympathy. As if a duke would tie himself to such damaged goods. He learned his lesson with Lady Constance Pemberton all those years ago. Beatrice felt ice flood her veins. She glanced at Alexander and saw fury transforming his features into something fierce and terrible. He took a step toward the voices, clearly intending to confront the speakers, but Beatrice caught his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "You will only make it worse." "They have no right." "They have every right to their opinions," Beatrice said tiredly. "And they are not wrong, are they? You have been kind to me, Your Grace, but we both know that our circumstances are vastly different. I am grateful for your companionship these past days, but I would not have you suffer damage to your reputation on my account." She released his arm and turned to go, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "Miss Hartley, those women are fools." Beatrice looked back at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "They understand nothing," Alexander continued, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. "They cannot conceive that I might seek your company because I find you remarkable. Because conversations with you are the first genuine pleasure I have experienced in years. Because when I am with you, I feel less like the Duke of Ravenswood and more like simply Alexander, a man who has been alone for too long." Beatrice's breath caught. "Your Grace?" "Alexander," he corrected. "Please." "Alexander," she repeated, the name strange and wonderful on her tongue. "You cannot mean—" "I mean that you have disrupted my carefully ordered life in the most alarming way possible," he said, and now there was something almost like fear in his eyes. "I mean that I think about you constantly, that I find excuses to ride past your cousin's estate hoping for a glimpse of you, that the prospect of returning to London and never seeing you again fills me with something I can only call dread." He took a shaking breath, clearly struggling with emotions he had kept locked away for years. "You make me feel alive again, Miss Hartley, and that terrifies me more than I can express." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but these were entirely different from the tears she had shed in recent days. "You have made me feel seen," she whispered, "for the first time in my life, truly seen. Not as a disappointing spinster or a pitiable creature, but as a whole person worthy of regard." They stood mere inches apart, and Beatrice could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see her own wonder reflected in his eyes. Alexander lifted one hand, slowly, as though afraid she might flee, and gently cupped her cheek. "Beatrice," he murmured, her given name a caress. She swayed toward him, drawn by a force she could not name and did not wish to resist. His head lowered, his lips hovering just above hers, and Beatrice's eyes fluttered closed in anticipation of her first kiss. Miss Hartley, where are you?" Lady Margaret's voice shattered the moment like glass. Alexander stepped back quickly, his hand falling to his side, and Beatrice turned to see her cousin hurrying across the lawn, her face tight with some urgent concern. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, her voice not entirely steady. "Lady Constance Pemberton has arrived at Willow Park," Margaret said breathlessly, referring to the estate on the opposite side of Alexander's property. "She is apparently visiting the Thorntons for the spring season. There is talk that she and the Duke—" Margaret trailed off, finally noticing Alexander standing behind Beatrice. Her eyes widened. "Your Grace, I did not realize you were present." "Lady Margaret," Alexander said with rigid formality, though Beatrice could see tension in every line of his body. "I was merely enjoying my morning ride." "Of course," Margaret replied, clearly unconvinced. She turned back to Beatrice. "My dear, you have visitors. I really must insist you return." Beatrice had no choice but to comply. As she walked away with her cousin, she glanced back once to see Alexander standing alone, his expression unreadable, and his fists clenched at his sides. Lady Constance Pemberton, the woman who had jilted him, the woman whose betrayal had shaped him into the guarded, solitary man he had become. And she was here, in Hampshire, mere miles from where they stood. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Beatrice learned through the efficient gossip network that connected all the local estates that Lady Constance was indeed staying with the Thorntons, that she was recently widowed and reportedly seeking country peace, and that she had already sent a note to Alexander requesting a private audience. That evening, Beatrice watched from her window as a figure on horseback crossed the fields toward Willow Park. Even at a distance, she recognized Alexander's powerful form, and her heart sank. She did not sleep that night. The next morning, she did not go to their meeting place. What would be the point? Alexander had been presented with his past, with the woman he had presumably once loved enough to marry. Whatever fragile connection she and Alexander had built over 5 brief days could not possibly compete with years of history. Beatrice had been a distraction, a momentary comfort for a lonely man. Nothing more. She told herself this firmly, repeatedly, trying to ignore the way her chest ached as though something vital had been torn away. By afternoon, she could bear the confinement no longer. She slipped out through the gardens, intending to walk anywhere, as long as it was far from the house and its suffocating atmosphere. She had nearly reached the boundary wall when a voice stopped her. "You did not come this morning." Beatrice spun to find Alexander striding toward her, his expression thunderous. He looked as though he had not slept, his cravat slightly askew and shadows beneath his eyes. "I thought it best," she managed. "Best?" Alexander stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Best for whom?" "For both of us. Lady Constance is nothing to me," Alexander interrupted harshly. "She has not been for 8 years. But surely seeing her again made me realize how thoroughly I have moved beyond that chapter of my life." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Do you know what I felt when I saw her? When she attempted to reminisce about our past, to suggest that perhaps we might reconsider our youthful mistakes?" Beatrice shook her head, afraid to speak. "Nothing," Alexander said flatly. "I felt nothing beyond a distant irritation that she had the presumption to appear after all these years and expect me to care. She was a ghost, Beatrice, a shadow of a pain I no longer carry." He took her hands in his grip almost desperate. "You are not a distraction. You are not a momentary comfort. These past 5 days with you have been more real, more vital than anything I have experienced in nearly a decade. Lady Constance represents my past, a past I have no desire to resurrect. You—" He paused, his voice dropping to something raw and vulnerable. "You feel like a future I did not know I wanted until I found it." Beatrice's eyes burned with unshed tears. "How can you be certain? We have known each other mere days. I am certain because when I woke this morning and you were not at our meeting place, I felt your absence like a physical wound," Alexander said fiercely. "I am certain because every carefully constructed wall I have built around myself crumbles to dust when you smile at me. I am certain because the thought of losing you now, when I have only just found you, is unbearable." "I was ruined," Beatrice whispered. "Abandoned at the altar, the subject of scandal and gossip. I am not a suitable duchess." "You are the only woman I want," Alexander replied simply. "The only woman I have wanted in 8 years. And if society has a problem with that, then society can go to hell." A startled laugh escaped Beatrice despite herself. "Your Grace?" "I asked you to call me Alexander." "Alexander," she corrected. "You cannot simply ignore what people will say." "Can I not?" He moved even closer, his hands rising to frame her face with exquisite tenderness. I am the Duke of Ravenswood. I have wealth beyond measure, influence in the highest circles, and absolutely no patience for the opinions of small-minded gossips. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. Let them choke on their own venom for all I care. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she had not realized were falling. The only opinion that matters to me is yours, Beatrice. Tell me you feel this too. Tell me I am not alone in this terrifying, exhilarating madness. I feel it, Beatrice admitted, her voice breaking. God help me, I feel it. But I am afraid. So am I, Alexander confessed. I am more frightened than I have ever been in my life. You have the power to destroy me in ways Lady Constance never could, because what I feel for you is so much deeper, so much more real. His forehead came to rest against hers, his breath warm on her lips. But the prospect of not trying, of letting fear keep me from this, from you, is even more terrifying. What if I am not enough? The question escaped before Beatrice could stop it, revealing her deepest fear. What if, in time, you realize I am just as ordinary and disappointing as everyone has always said? Beatrice. Alexander pulled back just far enough to meet her eyes, his gaze intense and unwavering. You are extraordinary. You are brilliant and brave and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with conventional prettiness. You have survived cruelty with grace, faced humiliation with dignity, and somehow maintained a generous heart despite every reason to become bitter. His voice gentled, becoming almost tender. If you cannot see what I see when I look at you, if you truly believe you are ordinary, then I have failed utterly in expressing what you have come to mean to me. The sincerity in his words, the naked vulnerability in his eyes, broke through the last of Beatrice's defenses. Rising onto her toes, she closed the small distance between them and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Alexander remained perfectly still, as though shocked by her boldness. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him as he returned the kiss with a passion that stole her breath and made her knees weak. His lips were gentle yet demanding, his embrace both protective and possessive. And Beatrice felt something within her soul click into place, as though she had been searching her entire life for this moment, this man, this impossible rightness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers once more. I need time to think, Beatrice whispered, though every fiber of her being screamed at her not to pull away. This is all so sudden, so overwhelming. I need to be certain that I am not simply grasping at the first affection shown to me after such devastation. She felt Alexander tense, saw pain flash across his features, but he nodded slowly. I understand. I would never ask you to make a choice you are not ready to make. He stepped back, though his hands lingered on her arms as though reluctant to break contact entirely. But know this, Beatrice. I am not going anywhere. I will wait as long as you need. They parted then, and Beatrice walked back to her cousin's house in a daze, her thoughts a chaotic tangle of hope and fear, desire and doubt. She had spent so many years convincing herself that romantic love was not for women like her, that she must be practical and reasonable. Now, faced with the possibility of something real and transformative, she found herself paralyzed by the magnitude of what Alexander offered. Could she truly be enough for a duke? Could this miraculous connection survive the harsh light of society's judgment? And most terrifying of all, did she have the courage to find out? That night, Beatrice lay awake in her bed, watching moonlight paint silver patterns across the ceiling as her mind refused to grant her peace. She replayed every moment with Alexander, every word, every glance, every touch, searching for signs of insincerity or obligation. She found none. What she did find, in the quiet honesty that darkness permitted, was the uncomfortable truth about her own fear. She was not afraid that Alexander did not truly care for her. His feelings had been evident in every unguarded expression, every tender gesture, every word spoken with raw vulnerability. No, her fear ran deeper. She was afraid of being happy, afraid of hoping, afraid of reaching for something beautiful only to have it snatched away as brutally as her wedding day had been destroyed. It was easier, safer, to reject possibility before it could reject her. But was safety truly what she wanted? Had she not spent the last 5 days feeling more alive than she had in years? Alexander had awakened something within her, not just desire, though she could not deny the way her body responded to his proximity, but a sense of her own worth, her own capacity for joy. He had seen her at her absolute lowest and had not turned away. He had looked past the scandal and social judgment and found value in who she was beneath. Could she not offer him the same courage he had shown her? The questions circled endlessly through her mind until, somewhere near dawn, clarity arrived with the gentle inevitability of sunrise. She loved him. Impossibly, improbably, after only a handful of days, she loved Alexander Sinclair with a depth that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. And love, she realized, required the very courage she had accused herself of lacking. By the time the sun rose fully, Beatrice had made her decision. She would find Alexander this morning and tell him everything, her fears, her hopes, her love. Whatever happened afterward, at least she would know she had been brave enough to try. She dressed with unusual care, choosing a simple morning gown of pale blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranged her hair in a soft style that framed her face. As she descended the stairs, her heart hammered against her ribs with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Lady Margaret was in the morning room, sorting through correspondence, and looked up with evident surprise at Beatrice's early appearance. "My dear, you look quite determined this morning," Margaret observed. "Is something amiss?" "Nothing is amiss," Beatrice replied, and found that she meant it. "I simply need to take a walk. I will return soon." But before she could leave, the morning room door burst open with enough force to make both women jump. Alexander stood in the doorway, still in his riding clothes, his hair windswept and his eyes blazing with purpose. Behind him, Beatrice could hear the butler's protests about proper protocol and announced visitors, but Alexander paid no attention whatsoever. "Your Grace," Lady Margaret gasped, rising from her chair. "What is the meaning of—" "Forgive the intrusion, Lady Margaret," Alexander said tersely, though his gaze never left Beatrice's face. "But I find I cannot wait another moment." He strode into the room with the confidence of a man who had made an irrevocable decision. Beatrice stood frozen, her carefully prepared speech evaporating from her mind as he approached. "Miss Hartley, Beatrice, I have spent the night wrestling with my conscience," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. "I told you I would give you time, and I meant it. But then I realized that giving you time might allow fear to convince you that what we have is not real, not worth fighting for." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the raw vulnerability in his expression. "So I have come to make a declaration, publicly and without reservation, so that there can be no doubt about my intentions or my feelings." "Alexander," Beatrice whispered, aware that Lady Margaret had subsided into stunned silence behind her. "What are you—" "8 years ago, I stood at an altar and watched the woman I thought I loved abandon me," Alexander interrupted, his words tumbling out with uncharacteristic urgency. "I swore then that I would never again make myself vulnerable, that I would never again risk my heart. I kept that vow religiously. building walls around myself until I became exactly what society called me: cold, distant, untouchable. He reached out and took both of her hands in his grip warm and steady despite the emotion in his voice. Then you appeared in a rain-soaked garden, your world shattered, your dignity intact despite your pain, and something inside me recognized something inside you. Not just shared suffering, though that was there, but a fundamental rightness, a sense of belonging I had not known I was missing. Beatrice felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she did not look away from his face. These past days with you have taught me that I was not living. I was merely existing. Alexander continued. You have reminded me what it feels like to laugh genuinely, to anticipate the morning because it means seeing you again, to feel hope instead of cynicism. You have broken every vow I made to protect my heart, and I find I am grateful for it. His voice dropped, becoming almost tender. I know we have known each other for barely a week. I know that by all rational standards, this is madness. But I also know, with absolute certainty, that I want to spend the rest of my life discovering everything there is to know about you. I want to wake beside you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want to give you the love and respect and partnership you deserve, and were so cruelly denied. He released one of her hands to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tears with infinite gentleness. I am not offering you charity or pity or a convenient solution to scandal. I am offering you my heart, damaged and guarded as it is, because you are the only woman who has ever made me want to risk breaking it again. Beatrice could not speak past the tightness in her throat, could only stare at him through her tears as he continued. If you accept me, I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice. If you refuse me... His voice wavered almost imperceptibly. If you refuse me, I will respect your decision. But I will never regret having tried, because you have already given me more than I dared hope for. You have given me back the ability to feel. The room seemed to hold its breath. Lady Margaret had pressed one hand to her mouth, her eyes bright with emotion. Even the butler, still hovering in the doorway, appeared transfixed. Alexander, Beatrice finally managed, her voice trembling. I spent the night afraid of hoping, afraid of failing, afraid of being hurt again. I convinced myself that I needed more time, more certainty, more proof that this was real. She saw his expression shudder slightly, bracing for rejection, and rushed on. But then you appeared at my door, ready to lay your heart bare before me and anyone who might be listening. And I realized something crucial. She freed one hand from his and lifted it to mirror his gesture, cradling his face with a tenderness that made his eyes close briefly. Love is not about certainty. It is about courage. And you have shown me more courage in these few days than anyone else has shown me in my entire life. His eyes opened, hope and fear warring in their gray depths. I love you, Beatrice said clearly, letting the words ring through the room like a bell. I love your wounded heart and your fierce protectiveness and the way you see me as I truly am, rather than what society says I should be. I love your honesty and your vulnerability and the way you make me feel worthy of being loved. A sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob escaped Alexander's throat. Is that a yes? That is 1,000 times yes, Beatrice replied, laughing through her tears. Yes to you, yes to us, yes to whatever future we can build together. Alexander pulled her into his arms with enough force to lift her feet briefly from the floor, burying his face in her hair as though trying to convince himself she was real. Beatrice clung to him just as tightly, feeling his heart racing against her own, feeling the rightness of this moment settle into her bones. When he finally set her down, It was only to frame her face with both hands and kiss her with a passion that made her previous kiss seem tentative by comparison. This was a claiming, a promise, a celebration, and Beatrice returned it with equal fervor, no longer caring about propriety or witnesses or anything beyond the man in her arms. Ahem. Lady Margaret's pointed cough eventually penetrated their awareness. They broke apart reluctantly, both flushed and breathing hard, to find Margaret watching them with a mixture of exasperation and delight. "I suppose I should offer felicitations," Margaret said dryly. "Though perhaps in future, Your Grace, you might consider a more conventional proposal? One that does not involve bursting into a lady's home unannounced?" "I apologize for the impropriety," Alexander replied, though he did not sound remotely sorry. His arm remained firmly around Beatrice's waist, as though afraid she might disappear if he released her. "But I found I could not be conventional. Not about this. Not about her." "Yes, well," Margaret's stern expression softened. "I suppose, given the circumstances, we can overlook certain breaches of protocol. Though we shall need to make a formal announcement, of course, and there will be considerable gossip to manage." "Let them gossip," Alexander said flatly. "I have endured worse, and so has Beatrice. We will face it together." The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that they would weather whatever storms society sent their way, filled Beatrice with a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. They spent the next hour in the morning room, making plans with Lady Margaret's enthusiastic assistance. Alexander would speak with Beatrice's remaining family, distant relations who had always treated her with polite indifference, to request her hand formally. They would announce the engagement immediately, allowing no time for speculation or interference. The wedding would take place in London in 6 weeks, giving society just enough time to adjust to the shocking news before presenting them with a fait accompli. "There will be those who claim you are marrying me out of desperation," Beatrice said quietly during a brief moment when Margaret had left to instruct the kitchen to prepare a celebratory breakfast. "That I have trapped you somehow. Then they will be revealing their own ignorance," Alexander replied calmly. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Anyone with eyes can see that I am the fortunate one in this arrangement. I am gaining a brilliant, beautiful, courageous woman who somehow sees past my considerable flaws to find something worth loving. You, meanwhile, are saddling yourself with a man who has spent 8 years perfecting the art of being difficult." "I like difficult," Beatrice said, unable to suppress a smile. "Easy has never interested me." "Good," Alexander murmured, pulling her close again. "Because I suspect I shall spend the rest of our lives being alternately maddening and magnificent, and I will need a woman strong enough to manage both. I believe I am equal to the challenge." They married 6 weeks later in St. George's Church in Hanover Square, before an audience that included half of London society. The whispers and speculation had been intense, as expected, but Alexander and Beatrice had faced it together with united dignity. Those who expected to see a desperate spinster clinging to her unlikely salvation were disappointed. Instead, they witnessed a woman who glowed with genuine happiness, and a man who could not take his eyes from his bride. Lady Constance Pemberton attended, a fact that might have caused consternation had Alexander not made his feelings perfectly clear. When she attempted to approach him before the ceremony, he had said with chilling politeness that he wished her well in her future endeavors, but that his own future was now entirely devoted to his wife-to-be. The dismissal was absolute, and even the most determined gossips could find no hint of lingering attachment. As Beatrice walked down the aisle, this time toward a man who waited for her with love and reverence clear in his eyes, she reflected on the strange alchemy of fate. She had been brought to her lowest point, humiliated before hundreds, her worst fears seemingly confirmed. And in that moment of utter devastation, Standing alone in a rain-soaked garden, she had found not just consolation, but transformation. The bitter Duke had taught her that endings could become beginnings, that shared pain could forge unbreakable bonds, that courage and love were sometimes the same thing. When Alexander took her hand at the altar, his grip was warm and steady, an anchor, a promise, a homecoming. And when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by all of London society, but felt intimate as a secret shared between souls. That evening, after the wedding breakfast and the endless round of congratulations, Alexander and Beatrice stood together in the gardens of his London townhouse. The late spring air was warm and sweet with the scent of roses, and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Alexander asked, his arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. "Every moment," Beatrice replied. "The rain, the darkness, the way you appeared like something from a dream, or perhaps a guardian angel." "I was no angel," Alexander said with a soft laugh. "I was a man standing in a storm, trying to outrun my own demons. And then you appeared, and for the first time in 8 years, I wanted to stop running." Beatrice turned in his embrace to face him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. "And now?" "Now," Alexander said, his voice low and full of promise. "I have found exactly where I am meant to be." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and full of a future that stretched before them like an unwritten book, waiting to be filled with all the days and years and moments they would share. It was a kiss that tasted of hope and healing, of second chances and new beginnings. When they finally drew apart, both smiling, Beatrice said the words that had been forming in her heart since that rain-soaked evening that had changed everything. "Some endings," she murmured, "are merely beginnings in disguise." Alexander's smile deepened, his eyes bright with love and laughter and the peculiar joy of a man who had finally found his way home. "Indeed," he agreed, pulling her close once more. "Indeed they are."